The 24-25 season is officially over for the Golden State Warriors. Steve Kerr had one job. One job. All he had to do was win one game without Steph Curry. Just one. Not a single one. After game one, where the Warriors played part of that game with Steph Curry, and they managed to escape with a victory, everybody under the sun came out of the woodwork talking about how Steve Kerr is a certified genius. He is running circles around Chris Finch, and he is just one of the greatest coaches of all time. And oh my gosh, anybody who talks badly about Steve Kerr has no idea what they're talking about. And next thing you know, Steve Kerr can't buy a single freaking win for Steph Curry to come back in Game 6 and take them home and save Steve Kerr's ass. And well, this is who Steve Kerr truly is when he doesn't have Steph Curry by his side, making him look like the coach that he isn't and has never been. I don't know how people saw Steve Kerr coach a bunch of all-stars in FIBA competition 2 years ago and watch him fail to come up with a medal. He couldn't even bronze, for crying out loud. And people still couldn't see through the fact that Steve Kerr is not the coach that you think he is. It's time, man. It's time. It is time for Joe Lacob to wake up, realize that Steve Kerr is not his answer and hasn't been. For the last 3 years, Joe Lacob wanted to do a 2-timeline thing with a guy who's incapable of adjusting his system in any kind of way to make it work between the older guys and the younger guys. You can talk about the roster flaws and all these things all you want, but at the end of the day, if Steve Kerr is the guy that people claim that he is, there's no way he's just getting swept because he's missing Steph Curry. You have Jimmy Butler, and you're going to bring the best out of Jimmy Butler and enforce him to be as aggressive as humanly possible. And that just didn't happen. The Warriors played through Potts the whole series. And congratulations to Potts for having a great game in this one. And what's truly hilarious about this is that Steve Kerr has been talking about how I have to play Potts because he's a connector. He knows how to play. He knows how to make a pass. Like, oh my, it's just unbelievable. Potts has been creating nothing for himself, for others. He took over at the point guard position for Steph Curry, and that is a lot of pressure for a second-year player, and he just could not do it. Up until the second half of this game anyway. In the second half, he really showed up. That third quarter, he was playing really well, and he had one bad turnover, and Steve Kerr loses his freaking mind. Steve Kerr doesn't see the big picture, but he loves to see isolated plays that he personally hates, and then he punishes players for it. So despite the fact that Potts had an excellent third quarter, all Steve Kerr cared about was that one single turnover late in that third quarter, and then he benches Potts. Steve Kerr is an abomination of a coach. It is time for the Warriors to walk away from him. So in this video, I am not going to really cover what happened in this game because what is the point? The whole point of covering these games and breaking down what happened and what needs to happen is so that the Warriors can be maximized in the postseason. But the season is over. So we don't need to go over what happened in the first, the second, the third, and the fourth. We can talk about some general details, like in that fourth quarter when the Warriors were actually making a run. Moses Moody was having some really good moments. And even though Quinton Post initially started that quarter with a 3-point shot, ultimately, he proved himself to be a completely amateurish player and completely ditzy, clumsy, just a goofy 7-footer who is not mobile enough, and he doesn't even have the coordination to just catch basic passes. Too weak to guard anybody, too slow to guard anybody, and he was just screwing things up left and right while the Warriors are trying to make this giant comeback, and it was a huge hindrance to what they were doing. Just complete and utter nonsensical turnovers that just gave the Timberwolves an easy path to the basket in transition. Things that just cannot happen while you're trying to make a giant run. And all Steve had to do was make an adjustment and bring in somebody else over Quinton Post at that center spot. And he refused to do it. He just watched Quinton Post be completely unprofessional for a chunk of minutes. And what could have been a potentially season-saving run in that fourth quarter never ended up coming to fruition. And I'm telling you, if it was anybody but Steve Kerr coaching this team in that first round against the Rockets. That series ends in 5. Steph Curry never has to be played to the ground in these stupid, tiny lineups that were never viable. How many months did I talk about the Warriors needing to change that stupid small lineup that Steve was starting? Steph Curry, Pods, Moody, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond. How many times did I say that that would be non-viable in the playoffs? What you have to do in the regular season is to completely figure out what lineups are going to be the most viable and which players are going to be the most viable come playoffs. That is the whole point of the regular season. And Steve Kerr wasted 2 months running a lineup that he could not afford to play in the playoffs. And the Warriors completely suffered for it in that first round. And through the greatness of Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler next to him, the Warriors were able to overcome the Rockets in 7 freaking games. But by the time they got to the second round, all these guys were already gassed. It should not have been that difficult for Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler to overcome a team that is led by Alperen Sengun and Fred freaking VanVleet, Jalen Green looking like a 6-man. But because they had so much trouble overcoming their size factor, and the Warriors essentially getting no rest between Game 7 and Game 1, next thing you know, Steph Curry suffers an injury that he's never suffered in his life in the NBA, a hamstring strain. And that is all she wrote. Did I warn or did I not warn that the older stars of the Warriors would get run to the ground in these tiny lineups because Steve Kerr doesn't seem to understand or care about the physical aspect and the grueling nature of going tiny all day and night. And you know what's hilarious? So all along I had been saying play bigger lineups because you're going to take that pressure off of their main stars, Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond. And ultimately, both Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler ended up dealing with injuries, and that is ultimately what ended the Warrior season way too early. And of course, goofy Steve Kerr realizes it way too late, finally takes Quinton Post out of the rotation, an unserious player, and then he starts Trace when Steph Curry is no longer there. So the impact of the overall size that the Warriors would have had with Trace in the equation to help their defense alongside Steph Curry was never realized. And without Steph Curry in this Timberwolves series, instead of Steph Curry going at a guy like Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert and making them completely vulnerable, these guys are completely empowered and they are stronger because the Warriors don't have the star power to attack those guys anymore. And there were a lot of times in this series where the game was super close, but then the star power of the other team takes control and then they go on this giant run and then they create that separation. And that's how the Timberwolves were able to move on to the next series. It's absolutely comical that the Warriors ended up losing to this team. Because if Steph Curry was fresh and healthy, he would have gotten this team out of there in 5. And no thanks to Steve Kerr's nonchalant nonsense, this guy throws playoff games casually, thinking it's okay. He's just the most privileged guy I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen an NBA coach take a playoff game casually and just throwing a playoff game. He does it regularly. He did it 2 years ago as well. Talking about a feel-out game in Game 1 against the Lakers. There are no feel-out games in the playoffs. You're supposed to be prepared completely and utterly. Steve Kerr flamed out a long time ago. It is time to let him walk. But you know, ultimately, the biggest blame goes to Joe Lacob. Joe Lacob is the guy who signed Steve Kerr to a 2-year deal where he's maxing out Steve Kerr and making him the highest paid coach in the league, despite the fact that at the time when Joe Lacob decided to give him that contract, the Warriors were sitting in the 10th seed. They were sitting in the 10th seed, and Steve Kerr got the largest freaking coaching contract ever for a 2-year period. And Joe Lacob is the guy that has undermined Steph Curry's timeline completely and utterly out of his own greed, thinking about some future after Steph Curry. Think about that for a second. You have an owner who's thinking about the future after Steph Curry, the greatest player that you have seen in this generation. And a guy who has given this franchise more rings than what it had in its entire existence before Steph Curry came along. Before Steph Curry, the Warriors as a franchise had 3 championships over what? Like a 70-year period? Steph Curry comes along, gives them 4 championships in the span of a decade, turns one of the worst franchises into the most valuable, more valuable than the Lakers and the Knicks. And that is literally and purely because of Steph Curry. And somehow, Joe Lacob thinks that he's the architect of it and he's the reason behind it. And he thinks he's gonna continue this, whatever he thought that he did after Steph Curry is gone, through Pods and Kuminga. That's what this guy thinks. It's a true and utter shame that a guy like this has enough money to buy the Warriors and then think that he can play the role of a GM and completely compromise the career of the greatest player that we have seen since Michael Jordan. This guy wanted to think about the future with James Wiseman while Steph Curry was still on the roster. And then he was more concerned about a future with Jonathan Kuminga than Steph Curry. And now he's more concerned about a future with Brandon Podziemski than Steph Curry. The Warriors won the title in 21-22 with one young guy in rotation, and that was Jordan Poole. They won a title with Andrew Wiggins being the second best player next to Steph Curry. Nobody thought that the Warriors had any shot in hell of winning a title that year, and yet Steph Curry got it done for you. And instead of doubling down on that and tripling down on that, Joe Lacob tripled down on his garbage 2 timeline plan. The following season, he's relying on a combination of James Wiseman, Jonathan Kuminga, Jordan Poole, all in rotation at the same time, and somehow thought that that was going to be good enough. I forgot to mention that Moody was also a part of that equation. Year after year after year, these players are not good enough. Whatever potential they show, all their flaws eventually and inevitably gets exposed come playoffs, if you can even get to the playoffs, which they couldn't get to it last season, by the way. Joe Lacob needs to look himself in the mirror, realize that he is no basketball mind. He is a complete and utter charlatan, a fake, pretending that he knows something about development of NBA players. He knows absolutely nothing about it. He needs to take his hands off this team and let basketball minds do their thing and reorganize what they need to do in the remaining years of Steph Curry. And now that Jimmy Butler is on board, they have something viable to put guys around these 2 players that makes sense to go and win at least one more title, because they can absolutely do it. But they need to change up a lot of things this offseason. Needless to say, Jonathan Kuminga needs to go. This has been a complete and utter distraction. He's not good enough of a 2-way player for the Warriors to hold on to and pay him a whole bunch of money and limiting their ability to go get more viable pieces, more veterans that are ready to help contend for a title with. Jonathan Kuminga, without Steph Curry, proved that he is a capable scorer. The Warriors need to let Kuminga go to a team where he can grow on his own terms without worrying about being or acting like he's capable of being a championship caliber player at this juncture of his career. He's a talented scorer who should be like a second or a third option on another team, having all the opportunities in the world to have the ball in his hands and see what he's all about. That cannot be done on a team that has Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler on it. He's not good enough of a defensive player for the Warriors to rely on at the wing position. So they need to flip him into something else. If they can do it, they should also flip Moses Moody. And essentially, they just need to get rid of a whole bunch of these young players and second-year players that are just not going to be good enough even going into next season. At this juncture, all these young guys, I'm going to name every single one of them. Pods, Moody, Kuminga, Quinton Post, Trace Jackson Davis, all these guys, include them in whatever package the Warriors can create to bring in another viable piece next to Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry. And honestly, if they can bring in some big fish along the way there, then you can include Draymond Green's contract in there as well. The Warriors need a roster overhaul and understand that there is no future with these guys when Steph Curry is done. When Steph Curry is done, just like every other franchise has ever done, when their best player, when their franchise player, when a transcendent player is no longer playing for their team. You need a little bit of a period where you lose and then you go and get some lottery picks and start over. That's what they need to do. But until Steph Curry is done, you need to organize your team around him. What Joe Lacob has done to Steph Curry in terms of the roster decisions, the coaching decisions, the hiring decisions that this guy has done is absolutely nonsensical, and it is absolutely unforgivable. Even Bob Myers, the only reason Joe Lacob didn't give Bob Myers max money is because Bob Myers willingly left and walked away under his own power. And honestly, if Steve Kerr had any shame whatsoever, and he clearly doesn't, he would walk away from this situation as well. Steph Curry deserves to finish his career with somebody better than Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr has completely and utterly destroyed many careers and compromised legacies in an unbelievable way. The last 3 years have been nothing short of complete and utter disaster. It is failure after failure after failure. The guy is making a mockery of the game of basketball, and nobody has the will or the stones to check this guy in any kind of way whatsoever. If he's not playing a 3-guard lineup, he's playing a 4-guard lineup. And when he finally even decides to run a 3-forward lineup, he decides to run a 4-forward lineup with no point guard in the previous game, by the way. That's where the game got completely out of hand in that third quarter in game 4, where Steve Kerr decided to run 4 forwards on the floor with no point guard on the floor. Buddy Hield was playing point guard. Steve Kerr is the master of committing basketball crimes on the regular. He somehow thinks all the rules of the game of basketball that has been set in stone somehow apply to everybody except for Steve Kerr. And Steph Curry has been saving him from disgrace all along. But again, with Steph Curry out of the picture, Steve Kerr once again got completely exposed as the charlatan that he truly is. It is an absolute and utter travesty that Steph Curry never got to come back in this series. And honestly, I feel bad for him. But he's a part of the problem in some ways. He never pushed the front office to get away from this nonsensical 2-timeline plan. He never pressured them in saying, hey, if you're going to keep doing this, then let me just get out of here. Trade me. Because I'm trying to win you titles, and I can't win you titles if you're constantly forcing me to try to go win titles with a bunch of kids who are not going to be ready to show up in the playoffs. And he's always enabling the nonsensical garbage of Steve Kerr, and he has no ability to control the wildness of Draymond whatsoever. So from that sense, Steph Curry is just way too soft as a leader who has to speak on behalf of basically everybody. If the front office is messing up, he has to speak on that. If the coach is messing up, he has to speak on that. If his teammates are messing up, he has to speak on that. And Steph Curry just isn't the guy who is able to fill that role. You think about what's happening in the playoffs right now. Essentially, the only team the Warriors would have to overcome if Steph Curry was healthy would have been OKC. The East, look at what's going on. The Cavaliers, the fakest regular season ever maybe, got booted out of the second round by the Pacers. The Knicks are on the cusp of beating the Celtics, who are now going to be without Jason Tatum for the remainder of the playoffs. This thing is wide open for the taking. And imagine if the Warriors just made one extra move at the deadline. Move Buddy Hield, move Pods, move JK, move Moody. One of those guys, all they had to do was go and pick up one more extra viable veteran that would have made all the difference in the world. Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond. One more veteran dude. And they would have gotten it done. It would have been so easy. Even with Steve Kerr doing a bunch of nonsense, if they just had one more viable guy that was more reliable than Buddy Hield, Pods, whatever guy that Steve was trying to use, there's just no way that series against the Rockets goes to 7 games. There's no way. If the conditions weren't so completely and utterly awful, the Warriors would have won a title this year. Because there's nobody left in the playoffs right now that is better than Steph Curry. Not a single one. Now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. It is past 6 a.m. where I am right now. As you can see, the background is different. The lighting is different. I had to wake up at 3 a.m. just to watch this game. Sorry I haven't been able to post the last 2 games. I had some complications and technicality issues. But having said that, there is some good news in terms of the Warriors and how they looked once they brought in Jimmy Butler. Next to Steph Curry, the Warriors looked absolutely incredible. I mean, what was their regular season record when Jimmy Butler came on board? Like 22-5 or something like that? I mean, that's pretty much the best team in the league. And that's while overcoming a bunch of Steve Kerr nonsense still. They were winning all those games despite the fact that Steve Kerr was constantly sub-optimizing his team and not getting them ready for the playoffs. So we've seen how viable the Warriors can be when Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler are healthy. If the Warriors front office can build better around Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, and no more distractions with young kids that need to play and all this stuff, and the fit doesn't work, and there's completely an unnecessary distraction and drama where it shouldn't be because Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, two of some of the best players in the league, are thriving next to each other. Get rid of these nonsensical issues. Now with the situation being what it is, I'm sure there are veterans around the league that are willing to come to the Warriors for the vets minimum to have an opportunity to compete for a title next to Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler after seeing how good these two guys are together. In my world, there's just simply no way that Steph Curry doesn't pick up championship number 5 before all said and done, and it is going to happen in the next couple of years. But again, they can't do it by themselves. They need proper help. Proper basic help would be good enough. As we've seen, after they lost Andrew Wiggins, the Warriors basically lost their ability to properly defend at the POA. That's the guy that the Warriors need to go and pick up. Because as good as Jimmy Butler is, one thing he's not is POA. He's not POA. The guy has a 6'6", 6'7" wingspan. You need wingspan, you need youth, you need athletic ability. You need somebody who is physically imposing and has grit and is going to be able to contain somebody like Anthony Edwards. And because they lost that, that's something that they're going to have to address in the offseason. So get rid of some of the kids at least, bring in some veterans, and I think the Warriors are primed to completely dominate next season. But that's obviously a long ways away. Now we have an entire offseason to deal with the pains of what just happened in this series. I appreciate you if you're still here with me. I know a lot of you guys have been following me on this channel without fully knowing my history or what my background is or how I'm able to do what I do on this channel. Now that I have a lot of extra time with no more Warriors games to cover, I'm going to reveal all those things to you. There are a lot of people who are constantly questioning why they should listen to me. What is it that I know that Steve Kerr doesn't? What qualifies me? All these things. I'm gonna reveal all that to you. Once you find out my history, I think you'll understand why I am worth listening to. Anyway, in the coming weeks, I will probably do a lot of player evaluation, individual players that are on the Warriors, and evaluate them, their viability moving forward. Probably use a lot of film work to do that stuff. But the stress of having to watch Warriors games and watching them be completely sub-optimized because of the charlatan work of Steve Kerr is no more, at least for now. And whatever off-season moves the Warriors end up doing, I will cover those as well as needed. So stay tuned because there's plenty more to come on this channel. I only really started posting full-time this season. And I've gained nearly 10,000 followers from this season alone. And I appreciate you guys more than you know. Thank you so much for your support. I will continue to do my best to bring you the most elite content in the world. And the best is yet to come. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time.